Video will be the first for our last unit on ecology, and this goes along with chapters 40.1 through 40.4. In specific, 40.1 and 40.2 are a lot of the background for ecology. So it has to do with a lot with climate, since climate is basically the key factor for establishing biomes, and it also has to do with basically intro, and what letter is that? Intro ecological terms. So in this video and in your book, we're going to go over just very briefly 41 and 42. 43 and 44 start getting into a lot more of a population ecology. And this is where we should spend the most of our time. So most of our time should be spent studying 43 and 44, but 41 and 42 you should know, but these are probably review items. So ecology is the study of interactions. It's broadly defined as the study of how organisms interact with each other, so other organisms, and with their environment. So these interactions are what we study in ecology. And going way back to probably the first day of freshman biology, you learned that ecological study can be broken up into a hierarchy based on the hierarchy of organismal ecology. And it ranges from the individual organism, all the way to the biosphere, the totality of all of the areas on Earth which can support life. And we kind of build up ecology in increasing complexity from the organism to the biosphere. For example, populations are a group of the same species of organisms, a group of organisms in the same species, and communities are all of the populations that live geographically together and interact. So all the different populations of all the different species found in a specific area that interact are communities. And then our ecosystem is all of the communities in a specific geographical area, and the biotic factors, or the non-living components of their environment. This graphic misses the in-between between ecosystem and biosphere, which is a biome. And a biome are groups of similar ecosystems. And basically the one factor that differentiates the presence of, or that differentiates rather, biomes, or causes a shift in biome, is one, climate, and two, available resources. Alright, so just a little bit of review, ecology from Bio 101 there. Like we saw in this graphic, climate is extremely important in ecology. It underlies most other things. And Earth's climate is influenced by various different forces. One of the most important being sunlight. And sunlight intensity varies, or the amount of sun energy that is available to a specific biome varies based on that biome's place on Earth. For example, we see a latitudinal change in available light intensity. So as sunlight hits the Earth more directly at a 90-degree angle at the equator, it is able to impart a more energy per unit area, and so those areas are warmer, have more available light energy. As you move up towards the North Pole or down towards the South Pole, that sun hits the Earth at a shallower and shallower angle, spreading out the same amount of energy over a wider area. This then decreases average temperatures and also decreases the amount of, or the energy distribution, the amount of energy per unit area. And this also influences, or has an influence on the seasons. So, for example, the seasons are created because as the Earth spins around or orbits around the sun, it also wobbles on its axis. And so summer happens when a given hemisphere is closer to the sun, so the sun's rays are hitting more towards a 90-degree angle, a right angle, and it becomes winter when that hemisphere shifts away from the sun, and the sun's angle, or light's angle towards those different land masses become shallower. Global air circulation, also due to uneven heating from the sun, creates precipitation and wind patterns. For example, here in this picture, warm air that is heated directly over or close to the equator rises, and as it rises, it cools and precipitates its condensation. So the rising warm air that's cooling off creates rain and precipitation. And then that descending dry air absorbs moisture as it moves poleward. So this cycle creates what are called air cells, and you can see those circulation patterns on the Earth's surface, and they're what is responsible for many wind currents. And this happens with uneven heating of water as well as cool water from the deep rises. It brings with them nutrient-rich waters, which then can feed or can provide raw fuel for populations of fish and other living aquatic species that live in shallower waters. So, important, the Earth's climate is extremely important to ecology, and many aspects of the Earth's climate, air currents, water currents, seasonality, light availability, is all due to the sun. Bodies of water are really important in the distribution of biomes, because Earth is 70.2% water, so it has a dramatic effect on climate. For example, currents, especially close to major land masses, dictate or influence greatly coastal climate. For example, in California, there's the cold California current coming by, and close to the east coast, there's a warm Gulf Stream climate. That's why in coastal California, very moderate temperatures. In the summer, this cold current kind of moderates the warm temperatures, and in the winter, the stored warm energy or heat in the cold current is imparted to land, and it's a very mild winter. On the other hand, the warm air and the warm water off the eastern coast creates very humid, hot summers and warm winters. In addition, as the air that's evaporated off this water moves inland, and right here we have a mountain range, up and over the mountain range, it loses its precipitation, leading to those lush forests of Oregon, Washington, and California, and then on the other end has no, water to precipitate in the areas like Nevada. You get the deserts of Arizona and Nevada there. So these mountain ranges, these geographic characteristics, the mountain ranges and the ocean can have a great effect on the climate and the type of biomes in those areas. Here's a picture of the different biomes of the world, and you can see how the biomes are very, very, very closely linked to climate. Every color is a different biome, and what do you notice? They're very latitudinally correlated. All the green, all the white, all the orange, very straight across from each other. Two big things you need to remember. Biomes, and therefore climate. Biome is very, very, very directly related to climate, which is in turn directly related to latitude, which is ultimately directly related to solar energy that's available and heat. And you can see that with this picture right there. And for further study, here's an example of different climates in North America. And besides the mean annual temperature, it also depends on precipitation. So precipitation, also very important. High precipitation, high mean temperature, tropical forest. High mean temperature, low precipitation, desert or grassland. High precipitation, not a great mean temperature, the coniferous and temperate forests. And low temperature, low precipitation at Arctic and alpine tundra. So temperature and precipitation are the two axes that we really look at terrestrial and biomes through. There's also aquatic biomes. Really briefly, aquatic biomes are really in lakes, right here, in oceans, this picture, are divided into photic and aphotic zones. So photic, ones that have plenty of light that permeates them or penetrates them. Aphotic, not a lot of light gets to the aphotic zones. Alright, and together the photic and aphotic zones are known as the benthic zone, or the pelagic zone, where most creatures live in the benthic zone. The deep ocean in the aphotic zone is beneath that, and even in the ocean we go farther to the absolute dark, the abyssal zone. Two other divisions we make, especially in lakes, is the littoral zone. In the ocean is called the neritic zone. This is very close to the ocean shore, wealth of biodiversity of life. And then the limnetic zone, farther away, where water's too deep to support rooted plants. This is more like the open ocean, or the oceanic zone. One of the first things you start looking at when we talk about population of ecology is how are different species distributed amongst in their geography. So what factors contribute? What factors contribute to the distribution of species geographically? Well, ecological factors and evolutionary history both contribute. So what I'm going to use, for example, is the kangaroo in Australia. The Australia, or the kangaroo's ancestor, first evolved in the geography of the continent that would become Australia, before it had separated really from Pangea about 5 million years ago. So, because that happened to be where it evolved, and because the Australian continent diverged and formed a isolated island, kangaroos really haven't been able to become more widely distributed than in Australia itself. That's an example of an evolutionary history factor. In addition, within Australia, you can see right here, this dotted line represents the zone of maximal distribution, or where the zones of distribution for various species of kangaroo are. And you can see that these areas on the outside, you won't find kangaroo. This is caused by ecological factors. On this outside red shaded area are cities, So that is one of the reasons due to an ecological factor, for example, that kangaroos aren't found there. So there are various questions that we study in distribution to study the distribution of species, but in general we want to answer where do species occur and why are they found there. And ecological factors and evolutionary history both contribute to the why. So we can ask ourselves a series of questions like, is the dispersal limited by something? Does their behavior limit their distribution? Do biotic factors, other species, limit their distribution? And do abiotic factors, or non-living things, limit their distribution? And what those are and why they have any effect, or the severity or the magnitude effect that they do, what we study amongst population ecology and distribution ecology. Within distribution, we have dispersion. And dispersion is the movement of individuals or gametes away from or towards the area of origin. And dispersion greatly contributes to distribution, so how organisms are distributed. And there are in general three patterns of distribution. There's a clumped pattern, but like this picture of mackerel, random, these kind of trees, and uniform, like these penguins. So in general, many animals and plants conform to a clumped distribution. Little pockets where they can, where organisms of similar species can help each other in finding food and resources and protection by living together, but not too close to completely exhaust shelter and food and water. So most plants and animals and fungi are clumped distribution. Uniform distribution happens especially with territorial species of animals and plants. So when they get very aggressive in defending territory, or plants when they secrete certain chemicals in the soil that inhibit growth of new plants close to them to maximize resources. Uniform distribution usually happens with species that aren't very collaborative or aren't very social, that don't rely on each other too much. In random distribution, not as prevalent, but any or many seed or species of plants whose seeds are dispersed by wind. Wind dispersed plants, you might see have a random distribution, right? Interactions between species and biotic and abiotic factors, like we looked back at the last slide, that do influence distribution and dispersion. And just to review, biotic factors are other living parts of an organism's environment, so other animals of the same or different species. And abiotic factors are the non-living components, so like rocks, sunlight, pH, salinity, rainfall. All of those things are part of an organism's environment, very important in ecology, okay? But are non-living. They really become important in community ecology, which we'll talk about maybe next time or the day after. So dispersion is really important to the overall shape of a species' distribution, and they're due to interactions between biotic and abiotic factors, like I kind of stated with the three patterns of distribution there. Right. When we look at dispersion or distribution as a whole, we'll see different patterns, but they will also can see different densities. So the area a species is distributed over is called its range. A species can have an actual range, so areas a species actually lives, and a potential range. Areas a species could potentially survive. For example, kangaroos have an actual range within Australia, but they could potentially live outside of that range. However, various things prevent them from living there. Like they can't travel over the ocean, or human cities are built there. So that's why they have a different actual potential range. Within that range, species are distributed differently, and this difference in distribution gives rise to population density, which is how closely do species live together, or organisms of given species live together. How many organisms per unit area? And population density is really affected by four things: births, deaths, immigration, and emigration. Births increase the density, deaths decrease the density, immigration increases the density, emigration decrease. So births and deaths both increase, births and immigration both increase the size of a population, increase the density, and deaths and emigration decrease the density. So density is a changing thing. The species density for different species in different areas of the world is different. And this fluid number is often closely approximated by different field sampling techniques. If you ever take a field biology course, you'll learn very, very well those different techniques and the maths behind those. Alright, kind of last, we're going to talk about demographics and survivorship. So we're actually looking at a population. We want to know a lot about the demographics, or the demography of that population. Demography is the study of vital statistics of a population and how those pieces of data change over time. So the age of the organisms, the density, the species density, the males and females, the birth rate, the death rate, immigration rate, emigration rate, different environmental variables, things like that. What we're going to start out with is just simply birth and death rate, and then males and females, because it's easy to kind of talk about that. In demography, young females are the most important to study when we're talking about the change in population distribution and density, so its size, because females are the only ones that really, besides immigration, can really change the population size. So what population ecologists study are really females that give birth to other females. And so this table is called a reproductive table, and that's for the Belding ground squirrel. And it has the age of different females and the proportion of females that have a litter. So you see that number increases all the way up to age 5 and then kind of stays steady. And the mean size of the litter in total, so we can find an optimum birthing age, but also the mean number of females. The mean number of females and the average number of female offspring. And these numbers are what's really important, because females are the ones that have the potential to increase the population. And so when we're looking at demographic data, especially with ages and birthing statistics, that's one of the things or pieces of data that are really important. So analysis of these live tables conclude in establishing survivorship patterns for different species. So we can see how long they live and when they give birth to other organisms. And in general, all organisms or all animals follow one of these three survivorship patterns. Humans, we don't have a high mortality rate for the first part of our lifespan, but as time goes by, it's more and more likely that an individual will die. So the longer you live, the more likely it is you will die. Alright? So the longer that you're alive, the higher the percent chance that you will pass away in the next 5 years. Alright? Unlike that, ground squirrels have, no matter how long they live, they have an equal percent chance of living the next 5 years from year to year. So their probability of death, whether they're 2 years old or 5 years old, is the same. And then other organisms like type 3 curves, like mussels, right away have a high percent mortality rate right away, but the longer they live, the more likely it is that they'll live even longer. So they have a high probability of getting very, very old. And there's different strategies that go into why the organisms fit these patterns, and we'll talk about that here on the next page. So reproductive rate, like we saw with the live table, is very important for the dynamics of a population. So it's a vital force in determining demographics and the age structure of a population. Various reproductive strategies have evolved based on success in different situations and environments. So, for example, one reproductive strategy like humans is to have very few organisms, but have very few offspring, but take very good care of them. A lot of postnatal care for a long time into their developing adolescence. So kind of maximizing the care that are taken of each organism, but then we don't reproduce or have very many offspring. Other organisms like bacteria or fish have a ton of offspring, but then there's not a lot of postnatal or once they're born after birth care, or that doesn't last very long. And these different reproductive strategies have evolved over time to maximize the fitness of those species in the type of ecology they find themselves. One thing we can do, though, is we can create age structure diagrams to look at how the structure of a population is now, and predict potentially how it might grow or decline over time. However, the limitation to these age structure diagrams is that they're very species specific, since reproductive rates vary greatly from species to species and even population to population. So an age structure diagram has the ages or age bands of different of organisms on the side, and then the percentage of organisms, males and females, that are of the total population that are in that age range. And so generally, if we see an age structure diagram like this, exemplified by the one for the Democratic Republic of the Congo for humans, and we see a lot of younger individuals and far fewer older individuals. So a lot of that population is very young, which means in the next 18 to 20 years, they're going to go through rapid growth. Especially these females be giving birth to even more young individuals, so we'll see that population grow. That is, if birth rates continue at the trend that they are. We have slow or neutral growth, as exemplified by the United States. It's almost like a column. Straight up and down, equal distribution. So just as many people seem to be dying and aging as are being born and are younger and reproductively virile. And so over time, the population won't really grow substantially. And then there are negative growth trends like Germany, which is almost a V shape. Far more older people in this population than younger. So the new births from this potential portion of the population that are going to be reaching reproductive maturity will not be able to replenish those that die from the aging area or the aging demographics of that population. So this is going to be kind of the end here for the first few chapters, the first few sections on population and population ecology, and we'll talk more about that and what the important takeaways are in class.